Recorded in beautiful Vancouver, Washington, this is the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra podcast, and I'm your host, Ashley Hall. Following recent news, the VSO had to make the difficult decision to postpone or cancel scheduled events for the next few weeks. As always, we were looking forward to sharing with you the talent of our orchestra, as well as the incredible special guests that were scheduled to perform with us. While our live performances are on hold, we are striving to keep our commitment to the community to bring you the highest caliber of classical music. To that end, I called up Rodney Sauer of the Mont Alto Motion Picture Orchestra to talk about the season's third VSO Goes to the Movies performance, which unfortunately won't be able to proceed as planned. We spoke a bit about how his routine has changed while staying at home, and he graciously played me a few of the pieces he put together for the silent film Safety Last. For updates regarding the current situation, please visit our website at vancouversymphony.org. All right. Well, hi, Rodney. It's so nice to be speaking with you again.
Certainly. I'm sorry I'm not out there.
Well, I am too. I think everyone's pretty sorry about that.
I was looking forward to this one. It's a wonderful movie, and it always goes over incredibly well. And it was going to sort of balance the end of the season, because of course last time we did the Alfred Hitchcock film, and that was kind of dark and moody and fun for that reason. But this one is just very funny. It's one of the best comedy movies ever made. And so anyway, we do hope that I've actually already prepared all the scores and mailed them out to the members of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. So we will be playing this one again, once things calm down and we get past the peak of this, and it's possible to do these things safely again.
Yeah, we'll just have to hold on a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. But at least we can give folks a little bit of a preview now to tide us over until then.
Right.
Before we do that, though, I was hoping we could just chat a little bit about sort of how things are right now. What kind of, we're all sort of stuck inside most of the time right now, but what role is music playing in your life right now? How are you continuing to keep playing music a part of your everyday life?
Yeah, I don't play as much music as what is part of it. I am dealing with I'm dealing with a lot of, I have a huge music collection that's in a bit of disarray, so having a little free time to go through and sort things is always good.
Yeah.
But yes, now my whole family is pretty much home. So my wife and my daughter, who lives at home, they no longer can go to their offices. So I can't just sit down and play the piano whenever I want, because we're sort of sharing the studio. But yeah, it's frustrating because one of the first things that happens, of course, is that the performances all get canceled. So we're all sitting at home. Everyone I work with, I haven't seen them since our last show, and probably won't, because we're trying to be safe and not interact. And I've had this lingering cold, which is unfortunate, because every night, you start getting these little symptoms, and it's like, oh no, do I have the coronavirus? And probably I don't, but there's no way to know. So I'm ending up self-quarantining already, and we'll just see how we pull through this. But yes, it's given me a lot of chance. Fortunately, I had a huge number of commissions of scores to work on, and those were keeping me quite frantic. But now I can calm down and take my time. So the San Francisco Silent Film Festival wanted 3 new film scores for their festival, which was going to be in May, and that's been postponed to November. So I have more time to work on those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a little bit of a silver lining then.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we talk a bit about the film that was going to be shown at the concert, Safety Last?
Yeah, so Safety Last was really the big breakout movie for Harold Lloyd.
Mm-hmm.
He had been a comedian for a very long time, and he had literally made hundreds of movies. He made a lot of very quickly made short films. Some of them are very funny. Some of them aren't that good, but he was, you would think of him kind of like a TV actor today. You just make things every week.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1920s, he starts moving into feature films, and this was not his first feature film, but it's sort of the first one that made a big splash. He has a character. He wears glasses. He has a straw boater hat. His character's always optimistic and always, says, yes, I can do anything. And in this film, he actually is a bit of a jerk, to be honest, which it turns out you can get away with in a short comedy. If you see Charlie Chaplin comedies, sometimes his character is a bit of a jerk, but it's funny because you're just watching him for 20 minutes. By the time you start making feature films, you need your characters to start becoming a little more likable. And it's a thing that I notice in this film. I'm not sure a lot of people do, because again, you're being distracted all the time by gags and jokes and stunts that are happening about every 10 or 15 seconds. Um,
Hmm.
when I was revisiting the score, I had a recording that I had made at the San Francisco Silent Film Festival when we played it there. And just the amount of noise that is coming from the crowd in that recording is it's impossible not to smile. And I could watch. I of course just had the recording, and we had played it to film there, and I had to try to line it up to the video, and I can always tell when I'm off because then the laughing doesn't come in the right spot. And so it's like, oh wait, they laughed too soon. I must be getting a little behind, and then you have to tweak the audio a bit and get it to line up. So
It's so funny.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just so wonderful to hear someone so knowledgeable talking about the film. Can you just briefly go over sort of what the film is about?
Yeah, so the plot of the film, it's kind of complicated, but it's all set up to just uh, to set up the last third of the film, which
Mhm,
involves Harold Lloyd has to climb the outside of a skyscraper in downtown Los Angeles,
mhm.
and he had
Which
a
is, of
friend.
course, one of the most iconic images maybe in cinema
Oh,
history.
indeed, indeed. As a matter of fact, there's a poster on the wall behind me of the one of the publicity stills of Harold Lloyd hanging from the hands of the clock. And
Uh-huh.
what's nice about that image is it's not just about this movie. I mean, the whole idea of being stuck, attached to a clock in modern life is so, and perilously hanging by your fingertips, is such a good image that it has been parodied and imitated many times. But yes,
Mhm.
this is the movie where it first comes up. So yes, and it was a dangerous film to make, but they had a lot of tricks. If you remember, of course, not only could they not do computer effects because there weren't any computers, they couldn't even do a lot of the kinds of camera tricks that people could do in the 1930s and 40s, where you would film people and then you would project something in the background, like the edge of a cliff. In
Right.
this one, everything you see in the camera is something that the camera actually saw. But that's not to say they didn't do tricks. And if you think about the geometry in some of these shots, it looks like he's hanging way above a busy street. But you realize, wait a minute, that building's not in line. The building right behind him that he's hanging on is not in line with the other buildings on the block. So it was built on as a set on a roof across the street. And then if you film it just right, it's very convincing. That
Mhm.
said, you can actually get a bit nauseous watching this film because he is hanging on these, and of course, it's not just the clock. Every floor he goes to, there's another hazard that comes out, and they get more and more ridiculous as it goes up. The film is not trying to be realistic at all, So there's a time when a bunch of pigeons land on his head, and he's got to chase them off. And there's a time when a dog barks at him, and he almost falls off the edge of the building. And there's a time he's going to climb in the window, but it turns out there's a photographer inside doing a photo shoot of a gangster, and then and then the photographer's his flash thing goes off for taking the picture, and Harold thinks it's a gun, and it's so contrived, but it's always funny because you're already on the edge of your seat thinking, how is he going to not fall off this building? And he keeps getting startled into various things. So it is quite an experience to go through this. And I have to say, the first time I saw the film, I actually had showed it on 16 millimeter film. We rented the film, and then I showed it, just by myself in the basement, watching it on the wall. And I thought, well, that was kind of cute, but it wasn't that scary. And then
Mhm.
we took that exact same film and I showed it in an auditorium. And of course, the image was bigger because we were showing it on a screen. But just the presence of all the audience and the music, it really made it much, much more convincing. So it's a movie that you can look up if you like and watch it. But it's going to be better at the Vancouver Symphony when we do this in a big theater and with the musicians of the Vancouver Symphony playing along.
For sure. So, we talked a little bit about your process for putting together music the last time that we spoke, but can you tell me a little bit about how something like this film differs from something like The Lodger?
Sure. Yeah, The Lodger has a lot of long scenes that are kind of serious, where you're trying to give a kind of a spooky or an emotional mood, and you have to decide how you're going to shape it.
Hmm.
This movie, there's almost more sound, I think, coming from the laughter of the audience than anywhere else. So our job is not to play anything that's particularly wrong, and to try to emphasize some of the parts in the story that I think are weak. I try to bring up the romance in this film because both Harold, he's kind of a terrible boyfriend, and his girlfriend is kind of a terrible girlfriend, and that's part of the humor. But on the other hand, you do want to feel for these people. So I picked a rather romantic love theme for them. And then again, there's a lot of just comedy where the comedy goes along. And there's two ways you can approach this. And the way that a lot of people try to do this is you watch the screen very carefully and you try to, anytime something happens on the screen, you try to hit that, in your score. So if you listen to a modern score that was made for this, when he's about to fall off the building and maybe he steps 3 times and you'll hear 3 hits in music. This was something that was not done in the silent era just because it was a lot of work. And if you get it wrong, it doesn't, people start noticing that you're not getting your hits right. And it also turns out that you don't really miss them if they're not there. So this sort of came up, I think, from the cartoons. The cartoons tended to be drawn very closely to their scores so that you have a very tight, connection between the score and the film. As a matter of fact, this kind of scoring is sometimes called Mickey Mousing, because if Mickey Mouse takes 8 steps, then the piano has to do 8 notes,
Plunk, plunk, plunk,
right,
plunk, plunk.
Right. And that's very
Yes.
and it's great to be able to do that. But you have to remember that these musicians working in the theaters in the 1920s, they might have this movie for a week and then it's gone. And so you're not going to have time to write a whole new score for this film. So what you do is you grab music that has a lot of sneaking around in it, and some of it's going to line up and other parts might not. But in general, the film paces itself with the audience. The audience will always laugh in the right spots. So the music doesn't have to worry about it quite so much. So the way I approached it, I came across, I picked a love theme. That was good. I go through, there's a lot of stuff that happens before the climb. Harold Lloyd is working in a department store, and there's a wonderful sequence where there's an amazing sale, and there's hundreds of women all trying to buy fabric at the same time, and he's stuck behind the counter trying to satisfy them all. And then all the little jokes that he can throw in around that, grabbing the tail of a cat instead of a feather boa, and there's a fun bit where there's an old woman at the back he's wrapped up her fabric but can't get it to her, and he yells, "Who dropped that $50 bill?" And everyone squats down on the ground to look for the $50 bill, and he's able to hand the cloth over their heads to this old woman. And it's just one little joke like that after another. And so for that kind of thing, I pick a very busy piece that is, very notey and covers a lot of ground. So it is actually kind of an exhausting film to play just because there's a lot of that. And then later on in the film, there's more suspense. And so I go to the kinds of pieces we call mysteriosos, which is your music that is... it's written for spooky scenes, but there's really 2 kinds of mysteriosos. There's serious ones and they're comic ones. And so in this film, we're mostly using the comic ones. I could actually give you an example if you like.
I would love that. Thank you.
Okay, so this first piece I'm going to play, it wasn't actually the first piece I was going to play, but since it came up, this is a piece called Misterioso Fantastique by Irénée Berger. And Irénée Berger was a French composer who moved to London and was a conductor, and then moved to America. And then he lived in New Jersey, and he just wrote silent film music. So this is one of his series of things. One thing I like about this piece, he's put a lot of thought into... It's not repetitive at all. There's a lot of fresh ideas that keep coming up about every 8 bars. You'll hear that it's very, but it's also a little bit silly, so it works well for comedy. So, Misterioso Fantastique.
just wonderful. I see what you mean about it kind of sounding suspenseful while still being very comedic.
Yes, yes, and there are other Mysteriosas that don't show up in this film. For in The Lodger, for instance, we needed
Mm-hmm.
spooky music that didn't make people laugh. This one, we don't mind about that. But some of the same compositional techniques. There's a lot of parallel tritones. That sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing would show up in both of them, but it's just you would approach them differently depending on the mood you're after. I'll also apologize a little bit. So what I'm reading from today is a piano reduction of the entire score. When I get to play this with the Vancouver Symphony, they are actually playing a lot of these notes, and my part is not as hard. So I am occasionally making some mistakes that I don't usually make because I'm trying to read some notes that I don't usually try to read.
Oh,
But
well, that's all
that's
perfectly
yeah,
understandable.
the hazard of doing this, and I don't mind. I'm just putting that out there.
Okay, well, I'm sure that's all right. How about something else a little more maybe upbeat? Do you have anything to share that's going to be more of a lighthearted scene?
Yeah, I think I'm going to play the love theme for the film. And
Mm.
this was kind of an interesting discovery because I was going through a collection of music and I came across a piece called "Charming Episode" by Eugene Ormandy. And
Okay.
Eugene Ormandy, if you're a classical music fan, you know he was the conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra for a long time, and you know he's controversial as all conductors are, but he was a very the group was very tight under his direction. And I thought, well, what is he doing writing a silent film piece back in, I guess it was 1927? And I looked into his career. It turns out that he had started out. He was born in Budapest in Hungary, and came over on the. He was a child prodigy on the violin, and then in his 20s, he came over to do a tour of America. And the story I read, said that during his transatlantic um, ocean liner trip, his producer went out of business. And so he arrived on the dock in New York. He didn't know anybody. He didn't speak English, and there was no one to meet him. And so he was kind of stuck there. And so he asked around. People realized he was speaking Hungarian, and they put him in touch with Erno Rapé, who was another Hungarian, but he was the conductor of the silent film orchestra at the Capitol Theater, which was a big theater in New York. Their orchestra to play for films was a 77-piece group, so it was one of the largest in America.
Mm-hmm.
And Erno Rapé chatted with him for a while and said, well, if you need a job, I can get you a job. And so he started playing violin there. He quickly moved up to concertmaster, and then it got to where he would conduct some of the overtures, and that's sort of how he learned to conduct. He said later in life, you know, at the Capitol, they used to use a movement from a Beethoven symphony as their overture. So by the time you've conducted that for 2 shows a day and 3 on Sunday, you really know the overture. You really know the symphony.
Right.
But in any case, I did not know he was a composer until I found this piece, and I'm not sure it's well known at all, except that we have this evidence. So this is
Mhm.
Charming Episode. It's written kind of like a song, so you'll hear about a 4-bar introduction. You'll hear kind of a verse, and then a chorus. I don't know if any words were ever written to it. I certainly haven't found them, but that's how I use it in the film. So there's a couple of scenes where his girlfriend is reading his letters from home. You know, he's gone off to this job at the department store, and he writes letters to his girlfriend back home. And so that's
Mhm.
when I would put this piece in.
That's just so charming.
It's a pretty little piece. So I open the film with that. When we have our opening scene, it's going to show up a couple times at the end for love letters, and then finally at the end when he and his girlfriend are walking off into the distance together, it comes back again. It's a pretty obvious way to use that, and the audience kind of expects it. And I'm going to give the audience what they want on a film like this.
Well, it's just lovely.
I'm going to play a third piece now. This is um, again, we're getting back to the Misteriosos. This is an unusual piece called Misterioso alla Valse. Valse, of course, being Italian for waltz. So it's a Misterioso in waltz time. There are a couple, what I'm using this for is the morning of his big climb. So the basic plot of the story is he needs to make money. He's been telling his girlfriend and lying that he's a manager at the store, but he's just a sales clerk and he doesn't have much money. So he keeps mooching money everywhere and sending presents home to his girlfriend, but hopes that he will actually have a job that is better than this by the time she shows up. And she realizes that he's stuck in the city with all this money and goes off to visit him. And so he's trying to pretend to be a manager, even though he's not. So that's why, I mean, he's not a very good boyfriend. They're not honest to each other at all, but that's part of the humor in this film. So in this scene, he's finally overheard the managers of the store saying, "We need some kind of big publicity stunt," and he remembers that his friend can climb buildings. So he's trying to get his friend to do the building climbing, and there's going to be a thing that happens that means he has to do it. But this is the morning of the big climb. There are crowds gathering. There are people looking around trying to figure out who is the mystery man who's going to climb the outside of the building. And so then I play this Misterioso alla Valse. This is by a composer named Domenico Savino.
That's a real jaunty one, isn't it?
Yes. Yep.
It's just so wonderful to hear these pieces that you don't normally get to hear performed ever, you know? It's like it's
Right.
just so delightful and different.
Yes, the pieces are a bit hard to find because they went out of print in 1929 and never went back in print. So you're looking for old music, but fortunately, some archives have kept the music, and they can be very friendly and help you obtain these pieces so that you can use them in scoring. And I'd like to stress this is my compilation score, so I put this together from music. It would be possible to find many other pieces that would suit these exact same scenes. And so
Mm-hmm.
a different compiler would put together a different score. And I'm not saying mine is any better than anyone else's. I'm pretty proud of this one. I think it works well for the film. But this is a hard film to miss with because it is such a good
Mm-hmm.
movie that just about any score is going to go over well. And you don't want to fight the film. You want to go with the film. But once you've cleared that low bar, a lot of music will work for it.
Well, I can tell you that I think you've done a pretty great job of it.
Thanks. Now I did, because I have a group, the Mont Alto Motion Picture Orchestra, and we do recordings for other film scores. I sent ahead a small 5-piece orchestra version of one of these songs, one of these pieces that's in this score. We happened to use it in a different film, and we recorded the score for that film. Um, but I thought maybe you could play that now to give an idea of what these Mysteriosos are like when you've got not just piano playing them, but the 5-piece orchestra that I use with the Vancouver Symphony. So that's piano, but then we add violin, cello, clarinet, and trumpet. And this piece is called the Pollywog's Frolic, which is a very silly name for a tune. There were a lot of tunes named after goofy animals. I think that the first and most successful was the Teddy Bear's Picnic, and that's a song you still
Mm.
sometimes hear.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you've got a Teddy Bear's Picnic, you can have a Pollywog's Frolic, and we've got the Grasshopper Hop, and there was a whole silliness involved in these little novelty numbers. One thing I like about the Pollywog's Frolic is it's darker than some of them, and it uses actually some very interesting compositional techniques. So it's going to work much like my other Mysteriosos, and we just throw it in for yet another sequence where he's climbing from one floor of the building to the next.
Well, fantastic, Rodney. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us today?
Well, not particularly. I think this is a great film. I am looking forward to when I can bring it back to Vancouver and uh, get the theater and the musicians working again, and see if we can um, bring this old film back to life in the environment it's intended to be enjoyed in, which is a theater full of people.
Well, I'm sure we're all eagerly awaiting our chance to finally do that with safety last.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodney.
Certainly.
Over the next few weeks, we'll keep the music going, so make sure to keep an eye out on our website, vancouversymphony.org, and our social media for any updates.